The sun beats down on the packed earth of an ancient marketplace. The air is thick with the noise of bartering, the smell of dust. Ancient Israelites, how repeatedly they had broken God's moral laws. We approach the book as a theological puzzle or a legal indictment. We view God as the legal proceedings suddenly halt. The courtroom is emptied, and God begins to speak not about the broken law, but about a stolen harvest. Throughout the ancient Near East, the harvest was the ultimate physical proof of blessing. A family's survival depended on granaries packed with barley, stone vats overflowing with sweet wine, heavy clay jars of pressed olive oil, and the raw silver collected by merchants. These were the intimate provisions of the covenant. They were the gifts of a faithful husband to his bride. But in Hosea, God makes a heartbreaking observation. He looks at the unfaithful nation and says, "She did not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, and the oil, and who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal." Visualize the quiet agony of this scene. God is providing the very breath in Israel's lungs, the rain on her soil, and the silver in her royal treasuries. And what does she do? She takes the tender gifts of her true husband and carries them up to the dark, smoke-filled high places of the Canaanite storm god. She pours Yahweh's oil over the stone pillars of a false deity. She uses God's own silver to finance her spiritual treason. The tragedy is profound. She actually credits her economic boom and political stability to her idols. The common assumption is that an offended, holy God, the offended party in a breached contract, demanding restitution. The problem is not that this familiar interpretation is wrong. The problem is that it is tragically would immediately strike her down. A human king would burn the fields, execute the traitors, and demand blood vengeance. But God does something entirely unexpected. His response does not look like an execution. It looks like a hedge of thorns. God declares, "Therefore, I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her, so that she cannot find her paths. She shall pursue her lovers, but not overtake them." Notice what is actually happening in the text. God is actively blocking Israel's path, but not out of spite. He is constructing a painful, frustrating barricade of thorns to disrupt her false romances. He is engineering her failure. He allows the foreign political alliances to collapse, the wealth to evaporate, and the foreign lovers to abandon her. He does this not to destroy her, but to starve the deception. He systematically removes the stolen gifts so that, in her absolute exhaustion and isolation, the illusion of prosperity will finally shatter. He strips away the noise so that she will look around the empty room and finally say, "I will go and return to my first husband, for it was better for me then than now." This hidden mechanism changes how we must view divine discipline. God's judgment in Hosea is not the cold rejection of a tired judge. It is a desperate, pursuing rescue mission in disguise. He breaks her comfort because he refuses. Incomplete. When we view Hosea merely as a lesson in rule-breaking, we completely miss the heartbeat of the text. Look closely at the actual words of, "to let his bride self-destruct." The loss of the grain, the wine, and the silver is the painful, necessary surgery required to save her life. The marriage metaphor is incredibly powerful, exposing the agonizing jealousy of a betrayed lover. But to fully expose the internal emotional conflict of God, the prophet changes the camera angle. The imagery is about to shift dramatically from a grieving husband to something even deeper. In the 11th chapter, the camera pulls back from the broken marriage bed and enters a completely different room. The metaphor shifts from the fiery betrayal of a husband to the profound, aching vulnerability of a father. Most ancient religions depicted their deities as terrifying, distant warriors or untouchable kings demanding tribute. But here, God uses an image so startlingly tender, it feels almost out of place in a prophetic warning. He describes himself as a parent teaching a toddler how to take his first steps. "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." Look at the physical, sensory memories, God brings forward in the text. He remembers bending down to lift the child to his cheek. The prophet. This text does not read like a cold courtroom transcript. It does not sound like a distant monarch mechanically dispensing a penalty for treason. He remembers holding them by the arms when they stumbled. He says, "I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love." It is a picture of total dependence and perfect paternal care. God is not talking about a geopolitical treaty. He is talking about raising a boy. But the childhood did not last. The child grew, found new friends, and turned his back on the father who taught him how to walk. God laments, "The more they were called, the more they went away from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and burning offerings to idols." This brings us to the emotional climax of the entire book. Holy justice absolutely demands that rebellion be punished. The moral laws of the universe require it. The Assyrian army is already marching toward Samaria, and God has declared that the protective hedge will be removed. By all legal rights, the rebellious son must be cast out and destroyed. But then, the text reveals something staggering. We are allowed to hear what sounds like an internal conflict within the heart of God. It bleeds. The passages are saturated with the agonizing, disjointed grief of a shattered husband and the desperate, recoiling heartbreak of a tender father. The central, God cries out, "How can I give you up? O Ephraim, how can I hand you over? O Israel, my heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender." The language is violently emotional. The Hebrew word used for recoils, or turns over, is hapak, which carries the idea of an overturning, a violent churning, or a radical reversal. It is the same word used earlier in Scripture to describe the catastrophic destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But here, the catastrophe is not falling on a city. The churning is happening within the chest of God. This completely shatters our assumption of an unfeeling, robotic deity. The God of Hosea is not a stoic Greek philosopher casually dispensing cosmic penalties. He is a father whose chest is tight with grief, staring down the road as his child runs toward a cliff. His holy justice demands exile, but his parental love recoils at the thought of absolute destruction. The tension is almost unbearable. He refuses to execute the fullness of his fierce anger, stating clearly, question is not whether the nation of Israel sinned. The deeper question is why God chose this specific, agonizing method to expose that sin. Why would, "For I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst," a human king would wipe out the rebels? But God's holiness is not defined merely by his capacity for wrath. It is defined by his incomprehensible capacity for mercy. Yet, the consequences of sin remain real. The nation will still fall. The captivity is coming. So how does God solve this impossible tension? How does he reconcile the absolute necessity of justice with the overpowering force of his relentless love? The answer is not found in a legal document, nor is it found in a royal courtroom. It is found in the most desolate place on earth. The answer to how God reconciles his holy justice with his agonizing love is found in a place most people associate only with death. It is found in the wilderness. When we read about the coming Assyrian invasion, the loss of the grain and silver, and the collapse of the northern kingdom, a natural objection arises. Is this judgment simply cruel retaliation? Is God finally exacting his revenge on a people who pushed him too far? Does this reading of the text suggest that God uses tragedy merely to settle a score, leaving the covenant to end in ash and rubble? The God of the universe force a faithful prophet to live out such a devastating personal tragedy? What does this raw, emotional poetry reveal about the text refuses to let us view the coming exile as an execution? God reveals his true motive in the second chapter with a verse that completely shatters our expectations of a wrathful, exhausted deity. He looks at his unfaithful, idol-worshipping bride and says, "Therefore I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her." Notice the verbs carefully. He does not say, "I will drag her into the desert." to punish her. He says, "I will allure her." The Hebrew expression carries the nuance of gentle, romantic persuasion. He promises to speak directly to her heart. To the original Israelite audience, the wilderness was not merely a geographic wasteland of rock and sand. It was a place of profound historical memory. The wilderness was the site of Israel's original honeymoon. It was the quiet, isolated landscape where God first brought them after the Exodus, before they built their wealthy capital cities, and before they encountered the seductive shrines of Baal. In the wilderness, there were no false political alliances to lean on. There were no foreign storm gods to credit for the harvest. There was only the bride, the bridegroom, and the daily manna falling from heaven. By allowing Israel to be carried back into exile, God is not abandoning her to the wolves. He is stripping away the noise. He is removing the suffocating luxury that blinded her so that he can woo her all over again. Then, the prophet adds a specific, stunning historical detail, hidden reality of divine judgment. This is not ultimately a story about the failure of an unfaithful human wife. It is a story about the terrifying God promises. "I will give her her vineyards from there, and make the valley of Achor a door of hope." The valley of Achor literally translates to the valley of trouble. Hundreds of years earlier, when Israel first entered the Promised Land, this exact valley was the site of a devastating national rebellion and a brutal execution. It was a location synonymous with a curse. But God declares that He is going to take the very epicenter of their historical failure and transform it into an open door of hope. The place of their deepest shame will become the exact threshold of their restoration. This reveals the restorative nature of divine discipline. God breaks our idols not to leave us empty, but to prepare us for true intimacy. He leads His people into the desert not to starve them, but to speak tenderly to them when they are finally quiet enough to listen. The theological imagery is breathtaking. It paints a portrait of a God whose love is so fiercely committed that it will dismantle an entire kingdom to save a soul. But Hosea is not allowed to simply write this beautiful poetry on a scroll and stay safely inside his home. The grand, cosmic promises of heaven require a physical, costly action on earth. God's declaration of unyielding love is about to force Hosea to walk out his front door, gather his remaining wealth, and step back into the dangerous dust of the marketplace, relentless and costly faithfulness of God. It reveals a truth that makes many religious people uncomfortable. God does not merely observe our human rebellion from a safe. Up to this point, it is easy to keep the story of Hosea at a safe historical distance. We can look back at ancient Israel, shake our heads at their foolishness, and judge their blatant idolatry. But the book of Hosea was not preserved for thousands of years simply to teach us the agricultural economy of the ancient Near East. It was preserved to act as a terrifying and beautiful mirror. You and I do not carry heavy clay jars of olive oil up to stone pillars. We do not burn expensive incense to the Canaanite god of the storm. But the hidden mechanism of the human heart has not changed since the 8th century BC. We still take the intimate, unearned gifts of God, our time, our intellect, our wealth, our breath, our daily success, and attribute them to our own brilliant effort. How often do you measure God's affection? Strictly by your immediate external comfort? When the bank account is secure and life is predictable, we instinctively assume we are at peace with heaven, completely ignoring the silent, internal distance between our soul and our Creator. We take the harvest He provided and use it to build our own personal empires of control, social status, and security. We construct our own transactional religion. We offer God our polite, scheduled obedience, assuming that as long as our modern granaries are full, heaven must be perfectly content with our divided hearts. We use the gifts of the true bridegroom to fund our detached distance. He suffers it. He feels the betrayal of a lover. Look again at the physical objects in Hosea's hands. 15 pieces of silver, a heavy, quiet affairs with the world. And when the false romances of this world inevitably fail us, when the career suddenly stalls, when the relationship fractures, when the illusion of our own control is violently shattered, we often completely misunderstand what is happening. We panic. We try to force our way through the barricade. When the path forward is suddenly blocked, we assume God is acting like a distant, offended judge, coldly punishing us for our mistakes. But Hosea forces us to read the disruptions in our lives through a radically different lens. What if the sudden barricade in your life is not a wall of rejection, but a protective hedge of thorns designed to keep you from destroying yourself? What if the profound isolation you feel in the destroying wilderness of a delayed promise, a sudden crisis, or a broken dream is not evidence of God abandoning you, but God silencing the deafening noise of your idols so He can finally speak tenderly to you? What if your current valley of trouble is deliberately being engineered into a door of hope? The central contrast of this entire prophetic book finally becomes intensely personal. This is not ultimately a story about how terribly you have failed. It is a story about what your failure exposes about God. Your spiritual unfaithfulness does not provoke Him to cold, calculated abandonment. It provokes Him to a jealous, relentless, pursuing rescue mission. He breaks your comfort because He refuses to let you find ultimate satisfaction in anything. And the oppressive heat of the Middle Eastern sun. A crowd gathers around a raised wooden platform where human lives are traded for metal and grain. Coarse sack of grain. This is the recurring image that will echo throughout the entire narrative. It is the physical weight of redemption. But why did? Less than His presence. But this kind of pursuing love is not merely a sentimental, abstract feeling. True covenant restoration requires far more than just a shift in perspective. The damage is real. The vows have been shattered. The betrayal carries a severe, undeniable cost. And that legal debt must be paid. To understand how the debt of human rebellion is ultimately settled, we must leave the theological heights and return to the physical reality of the prophet. We must follow Hosea out of his empty house, walk with him back into the crushing heat of the city, and stand once again on the dirt floor of the auction block where this entire story began. The noise of the ancient marketplace fades back in. We have returned to the exact spot where we began, the dusty, crowded auction block beneath the brutal Middle Eastern sun. But now, we are no longer looking at a bizarre prophetic stunt. We are watching the cosmic architecture of redemption unfold in real time. When Hosea steps forward, he is not merely a grieving husband from the 8th century BC. He is acting out the heartbeat of heaven. He looks at the woman who has humiliated him, broken his home, and sold herself into complete destitution, and he pays the price. He hands over the 15 shekels of silver and the measure and a half of barley. God demand this specific, humiliating price? Why did this marriage have to end up on the dirt floor of a slave market? To understand the true, do not miss the profound, heartbreaking poetry of this exchange. The silver and the grain, the very gifts of the harvest that God had lovingly provided. The exact same gifts that Israel had stolen and offered to false gods are now the precise currency used to buy her back. The very resources she abused are used to secure her freedom. This changes everything about how we understand the character of God. The book of Hosea compresses the massive theology of the Bible into 3 staggering truths. God's justice is absolutely real. His grief over our rebellion is profound, but His pursuing grace is the strongest force in the universe. We see this transformation immediately in the text. The terrifying names of the children, once a countdown to national doom, are miraculously reversed. God declares a new reality. Jezreel no longer means God scatters, it becomes God plants. To the daughter named Lo-Ruhamah, not loved, God declares, I will show my love to her, and to Lo-Ammi, not my people. God looks at the broken, undeserving bride and says, You are my people. And she finally answers, You are my God. But the silver and the grain in Hosea's hands are ultimately pointing to a much greater marketplace and a much costlier rescue. Centuries after Hosea wiped the dirt from Gomer's face and led her home, another prophet would step into the dust of human history, the weight of that silver. We have to look at the world Hosea lived, in a world that appeared completely opposite to the tragedy unfolding inside his own home. The ultimate bridegroom would come not just to a wealthy, wandering northern kingdom, but to a completely shattered world. And the price of redemption would involve silver and grain once again. Only this time, the silver was not handed to a slave trader. It was the 30 pieces of silver handed to a betrayer in a dark garden. And the grain was not a sack of barley. It was the bread of life, physically broken on a Roman cross to pay the unpayable debt of a chronically unfaithful bride. This is where the story confronts you today. You may feel like you have wandered too far. You may look at the broken pieces of your own compromises, your idols, or the quiet betrayals of your own heart, and assume that God has finally turned his back on you. You may think your unfaithfulness has permanently disqualified you from his covenant. But you do not serve a God who coldly calculates your failures from a distance. You serve a Father whose heart recoils with compassion. You serve a bridegroom who walks into the deepest, most isolating wilderness of your life, not to destroy you, but to allure you back home. The price has already been paid. The debt is finished. You are not abandoned. You are purchased. The streets outside the slave market told a very different story. To understand the scandal of Hosea's broken home, if this journey through the book of Hosea has helped you see the relentless, pursuing love of God more clearly, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below with the biblical book or pattern you would like us to investigate next. You must first understand the glittering world that surrounded it. It is the middle of the 8th century BC. The northern kingdom of Israel is living through a spectacular renaissance. Under the reign of King Jeroboam II, the nation has achieved a level of wealth, military dominance, and geographic expansion not seen since the legendary days of King Solomon. The surrounding empires of Egypt and Assyria are temporarily distracted by their own internal conflicts, leaving Israel free to control the lucrative trade routes of the ancient Near East. This is not a nation in distress. Archaeologists excavating the capital city of Samaria from this exact period have uncovered the remains of absolute luxury, sprawling estates, formidable stone fortifications, and aristocratic winter houses decorated with imported ivory carvings. The merchant class is booming. The grain silos are full. Standing there is a woman bruised, humiliated, and bound for slavery. She has sold herself into absolute destitution, abandoned by the men who promised her a life, and their religion is thriving right alongside their economy. If you were to walk into the national sanctuaries at Bethel or Gilgal, you would be overwhelmed by the sensory display. You would hear the bleating of fat calves waiting for slaughter. You would smell the heavy, expensive incense and the smoke of countless burnt offerings rising into the sky. You would witness massive crowds celebrating religious festivals, singing hymns to the God of their ancestors. The Israelites looked at their protected borders, their flowing trade, and their packed worship centers, and they made a fatal theological calculation. They assumed God was entirely pleased with them. They believed that because their fields were producing barley and their merchants were accumulating silver, their covenant with heaven must be perfectly intact. But beneath this veneer of extreme prosperity, the nation was rotting from the inside out. They had constructed a transactional religion. They were singing songs to the God of the Exodus, but they were secretly attributing their agricultural success to Baal, the Canaanite storm god of fertility. They were mixing the sacred identity of Yahweh with the dark, transactional rituals of the surrounding culture. This reveals a terrifying human vulnerability. It is the tragedy of confusing material provision with spiritual approval. We instinctively measure God's affection by our external comfort. When the harvest is abundant, we assume our hearts are aligned with heaven, of luxury, but left her with nothing. Then, a familiar figure steps out of the crowd. His posture is heavy, He does not shout or argue. But Israel had become historically successful while remaining spiritually hollow. They were actively oppressing the poor and crushing the vulnerable to maintain their lavish lifestyles, all while tithing at the temple. They were maintaining the empty rituals of a marriage, while their intimate affection belonged to a completely different lover. So, what does God do when his people are too successful to realize they are abandoning him? How does heaven break through an illusion of prosperity that is so thick? Not even the priests recognized the deception. Standard prophetic warnings were no longer working. The nation had grown entirely deaf to sermons. God needed a sign that would shatter their comfortable assumptions. He needed an image so visceral, so disturbing, that it would force the entire nation to see its true reflection. The national illusion of safety set the stage for a devastating personal command to wake up a sleeping nation. God was about to ask a faithful man to walk into a nightmare. The book begins without warning. There is no grand temple vision with singing angels like Isaiah saw, and no terrifying chariot of fire sweeping through the clouds like Ezekiel witnessed. Instead, the word of the Lord comes to Hosea with a brutally intimate directive that would have caused any ancient Israelite to recoil in horror. The command is recorded in the second verse of the book. He simply walks forward and places a precise, carefully counted price into the hands of the auctioneer, 15 shekels of silver, and a measure and a half. Go 1. Take to yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom. For the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. To feel the shock of this moment, we have to look closely at the language. The Hebrew word used here is zana. It is a harsh, yagged word. In its most literal sense, it describes prostitution, illicit sexual relations, or chronic infidelity. The English translation of whoredom or unfaithfulness is accurate, but the original term carries an intense physical and cultural weight that standard English softens. In the ancient Near East, the purity of the marriage bond was the absolute bedrock of the community. To commit zana was not merely to break a rule. It was to take the most exclusive, sacred intimacy and scatter it cheaply in the streets. By forcing a holy prophet to bind his life to a woman defined by zana, God is making a radical theological statement. He is intentionally exposing the massive difference between breaking a contract and breaking a covenant. When a contract is violated, the injured party seeks legal damages. The relationship is transactional. If you fail to pay, the service stops. Many people assume this is how God operates, like a divine CEO or a strict landlord. We assume that when we sin, God acts like a breached business partner, coldly calculating our debt. But a covenant is fundamentally different. Of barley. This man is not a wealthy stranger looking for a servant. He is a husband buying back his own wife. A covenant is not an exchange of goods and services. It is an exchange of persons. It is a vow that says, I am yours, and you are mine. This is the hidden mechanism that changes how we must read the entire Bible. When the nation of Israel attributes their wealthy harvests to Baal, while still offering polite sacrifices at Yahweh's temple, God does not react like a frustrated boss. He reacts like a betrayed husband. The quiet agony of Hosea, standing at the altar with Gomer, looking into the eyes of a woman whose heart already belongs to other lovers, is the exact physical mirror of God's own experience. The familiar interpretation of sin as a mere legal infraction fails to capture the emotional violence of rebellion. God is not simply an offended judge banging a gavel from a distant throne. He is a wounded lover, grieving over a shattered home. Hosea obeys the voice of God. He takes Gomer into his house. We can only imagine the scandalized whispers of the neighbors. As the prophet walks through the village with a woman known for her indiscretions, he offers her his name, his protection, and his provision. But the tension in the story does not resolve with the wedding vows. The tragedy soon moves from the marriage bed to the nursery. His name is Hosea, a prophet of Israel. Her name is Gomer. If you have spent any time reading the prophets, you likely know the outline. Gomer conceives, and the innocent children born into this fractured home are about to carry the agonizing weight of a nation's impending doom. Hosea's heartbreak is amplified by the birth of 3 children, whose names form a terrifying countdown. The birth of a child is typically a moment of profound joy in the ancient Near East, celebrated with music, feasting, and the gathering of neighbors. But in Hosea's home, the cries of a newborn only signal the approaching darkness. Over the course of a few years, Gomer gives birth to 3 children. With each pregnancy, the tension in the household deepens. The text leaves a haunting ambiguity about whether Hosea is even the biological father of the younger 2. But regardless of their parentage, God uses the naming of these infants to broadcast a terrifying message to the nation. The first child, a son, is born. God instructs Hosea to name him Jezreel, to an Israelite ear. This name carried the chill of a violent history. Jezreel was a blood-soaked valley where previous kings had committed atrocities to secure their power. The name literally means God scatters. By giving a child this name, God is announcing that the wealthy, secure kingdom of Jeroboam is about to be shattered and scattered to the wind. The nation's military pride is a fragile illusion. Sometime later, Gomer conceives again and gives birth to a daughter. Of this story, most readers view the book of Hosea simply as a bizarre, almost unbelievable allegory. We are taught that God commanded a holy man. This time, the command from heaven cuts deeper into the emotional fabric of the home. God says, "Name her Lo-Ruhamah." To understand the crushing weight of this name, we must look at the Hebrew word Rakem. It is a beautiful, physical word rooted in the term for a mother's womb. It describes the fierce, innate compassion and tender mercy a parent feels for their child. But God attaches the prefix lo, which simply means no. The little girl is named No Mercy or Not Loved. Imagine the daily agony of Hosea, walking through the dusty streets of Samaria, calling his daughter in for the evening meal, shouting "Not Loved" for the entire village to hear every time her name was spoken. It was a living declaration that God's protective, maternal compassion for the northern kingdom had run dry. Then comes the final, devastating blow. Gomer bears a 3rd child, another son. God tells the prophet to name him Lo-Ami. It translates to, "Not my people." This is arguably the darkest moment in the entire history of the prophets. To grasp its significance, you have to remember the foundation of Israel's existence. Centuries earlier, when God rescued a band of desperate slaves from Egypt, He brought them to Mount Sinai and made a covenant with them. The bedrock formula of that ancient vow was, "I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God." To marry a chronically unfaithful woman, to serve as a living, breathing sermon illustration. We assume it was an elaborate prophetic stunt designed to show with the birth of this 3rd child, God is systematically dismantling the Exodus. He is taking the sacred wedding vows of Mount Sinai and tearing them in half. By naming the boy Lo-Ami, God is officially pronouncing the covenant broken. He is looking at the wealthy, religious, unfaithful nation and saying, "You are not my people, and I am not your God." The divorce papers have been served. The legal protection is gone. The Assyrian Empire is already beginning to sharpen its swords on the horizon, ready to sweep in and devour the unprotected nation. It appears to be the absolute end. The finality of the name suggests that God has closed his heart forever. If the covenant is officially broken, is the story over? But one overlooked detail in the 2nd chapter reveals a hidden mechanism in God's judgment. To understand what happens next, we have to return to the text. Section 5, the stolen gifts. The divorce appears final. The northern kingdom is wealthy but spiritually hollow. The prophet's home is shattered, and the names of the children echo through the streets like a death sentence. Up to this point, the story has been a terrifying portrait of consequences. The question has been entirely historical and legal. But as we enter the 2nd chapter, the architecture of the book shifts.